You probably know someone who shuts down when things get too personal. They avoid serious conversations, ignore emotional tension, and withdraw without explanation. They might disappear for a few days, act cold when you try to connect, or minimize everything you're feeling with short, detached responses. They don't yell, they don't fight, they just fade. For anyone in a relationship with someone like this, it's not just confusing, it's exhausting. You start questioning yourself, did I do something wrong? Or why won't they let me in? But the truth has less to do with you, and more to do with something many people don't recognize: avoidant attachment. Avoidant people create emotional distance as a defense. They don't handle closeness well. They've learned to protect themselves by staying in control, keeping things surface level, and pushing away anything that feels too intimate. It's not always intentional, but the damage it causes is very real. This video is about that damage. The invisible weight of loving someone who never fully lets you in. The emotional toll of giving your best to someone who keeps holding back. And most importantly, the reasons why it happens and what you can do about it. We're going to break down avoidant behavior in simple terms, show you the signs to look for, and explain how to protect your emotional health when you're on the receiving end of this pattern. If you've ever loved someone who kept you at a distance, this is for you. What you experience on the surface, silence, distance, or disinterest, often has deeper psychological roots. To understand why someone keeps you at arm's length, you need to understand what avoidant attachment really is. It's not just a personality quirk or a communication style. It's a system, wired early and hard to break. Avoidant attachment is formed in childhood, usually when caregivers are physically present but emotionally distant. When a child reaches out for comfort and is consistently met with indifference or discomfort, they start to adapt. They learn that showing emotion leads nowhere. So, they stop showing it. They build independence not from strength, but from necessity. Over time, emotional self-sufficiency becomes their survival tool. By adulthood, this defense mechanism turns into a pattern, not because the avoidant person wants to hurt others, but because emotional closeness now triggers discomfort. Relationships require vulnerability. Vulnerability, for them, signals danger. So they retreat. They keep conversations safe, reactions measured, and intimacy just far enough to feel in control. It's important to know that people with avoidant attachment aren't emotionless. They feel deeply, but those feelings stay buried. On the outside, they seem calm, even cold. Inside, there's often a quiet storm of fear. Fear of being trapped, fear of losing identity, fear of depending on someone who might let them down. They rarely express this, because admitting it would mean confronting the very emotions they've spent years avoiding. Some avoidants aren't even aware of their own behavior. They just know that closeness makes them tense. They might say they need space, or that they're not ready. But what they often mean is, I don't know how to be close without feeling unsafe. This isn't an excuse. It's the framework they're working from. Understanding this blueprint doesn't excuse the pain they cause, but it helps you recognize what's actually happening beneath the emotional shutdowns. This chapter is about pulling back the curtain, not to justify avoidant behavior, but to expose the system that drives it. Because if you don't see the blueprint, you'll keep blaming the bricks. In relationships, intimacy is often seen as a source of comfort and connection. However, for individuals with avoidant attachment styles, intimacy can trigger discomfort and fear. This paradox arises from deep-seated beliefs and past experiences that associate closeness with vulnerability and potential pain. Avoidant individuals may have developed coping mechanisms early in life, learning to rely on themselves and suppress emotional needs. As a result, they might perceive emotional closeness as a threat to their autonomy. Expressions of affection or attempts at deep connection can be misinterpreted as attempts to control or engulf them. This fear of intimacy doesn't mean they don't desire connection. On the contrary, many avoidant individuals yearn for closeness but struggle with the vulnerability it requires. They might initiate relationships enthusiastically but withdraw when emotional demands increase. This push-pull dynamic can be confusing for their partners, who may feel rejected or unloved. Communication challenges often arise in these relationships. Avoidant individuals might avoid discussing feelings or dismiss their partner's emotional expressions. They may prioritize logic over emotion, leading to misunderstandings and unmet needs. Their partners might feel isolated, unable to bridge the emotional gap. Physical intimacy can also be affected. While they might engage in physical closeness, avoidant individuals may struggle with the emotional aspects of intimacy. They might compartmentalize physical and emotional connections, leading to relationships that lack depth and emotional fulfillment. Understanding these patterns is crucial for both partners. Recognizing that avoidant behaviors stem from fear rather than lack of interest can foster empathy. However, it's also important to acknowledge the emotional toll on partners who may feel consistently rejected or undervalued. Addressing these challenges often requires intentional effort. Therapy can help avoidant individuals explore the roots of their fears and develop healthier attachment patterns. Open communication, patience, and setting boundaries can also support both partners in navigating the complexities of intimacy. Ultimately, while avoidant individuals can form meaningful relationships, it requires self-awareness and a willingness to confront discomfort. Partners, in turn, need to assess their own needs and determine whether the relationship dynamics align with their emotional well-being. Emotional disconnection creates confusion that's hard to explain. You ask a question, and the answer feels mechanical. You reach for closeness, and the response is a step back. Conversations stay on the surface. Moments that should bring you closer pass by flat, empty, or interrupted. There's a presence, but no access. You're not being pushed away with force. You're just never fully let in. People in relationships with avoidant partners often feel isolated, even when they're not physically alone. The absence isn't in the room. It's in the space between what is said and what is truly meant. You can talk every day and still feel like a stranger. This isn't about neglect in the obvious sense. It's emotional starvation. You're giving, adapting, making room, but there's no reciprocity, no mutual effort to close the emotional distance. Doubt creeps in, not because of dramatic arguments, but because of a lack of genuine connection. You try to share something meaningful, and it's deflected. You show vulnerability, and it's met with silence or a quick subject change. Over time, your emotional needs begin to feel like a burden. You question whether you're being too sensitive. You wonder if maybe expecting emotional presence is asking for too much. Meanwhile, the avoidant person is not coasting through the relationship with ease. They often experience tension they can't explain. Emotional closeness creates discomfort, not because they don't care, but because closeness feels like exposure. It feels unsafe to let someone see their doubts, insecurities, or emotional reactions. So they pull back, not always out of cruelty, but out of habit and fear. When things become emotionally intense, avoidants typically retreat. They may delay responses, minimize emotional conversations, or focus on external distractions like work, hobbies, or screens. They're not trying to punish their partner. They're trying to regain emotional control. The irony is that what helps them feel safe emotionally often causes emotional damage to the person who loves them. The partner begins to absorb that damage quietly. They may stop bringing up feelings to avoid being dismissed. They may downplay their own needs to preserve peace. They start managing the relationship alone, making emotional compromises that eventually affect their self-worth. Being constantly met with distance teaches them to stop reaching. That's not growth, it's emotional resignation. On the avoidant side, guilt often builds up. They may realize they're hurting someone they care about, but feel trapped in a cycle. They don't know how to be emotionally available. Attempts to express themselves feel awkward or unsafe. Emotional conversations register as confrontation. Vulnerability feels like a risk that might lead to loss of control, rejection, or failure. So they shut down again, reinforcing the same pattern. In relationships like these, both people suffer. One suffers from emotional absence. The other suffers from emotional overload they don't know how to manage. No one truly wins. The avoidant person stays locked in defensive habits, and the partner ends up emotionally exhausted, often without knowing what went wrong. These dynamics aren't always visible to others. From the outside, everything might look stable. No explosive fights, no public drama. But underneath the surface, there's emotional wear and tear that slowly breaks the connection. Both individuals drift further apart, not because they want to, but because neither feels fully safe to show up as they are. What makes this kind of pain particularly difficult is that it's hard to name. There's no single moment that defines it. It builds through repeated emotional disconnections. It grows in silence, and by the time it's acknowledged, damage has often been done on both sides. Avoidants are not villains. Their behavior is rooted in real fear, often linked to past emotional neglect or inconsistency. But understanding the source doesn't erase the consequences. Their partners are not needy or demanding. They're human beings responding to an emotional gap that shouldn't have to exist in the first place. Emotional withdrawal doesn't always come with obvious signs. Many avoidant behaviors can appear reasonable, even mature, when seen in isolation. The person might say they need time to think, prefer to process alone, or don't want to create drama. These statements seem thoughtful, but repeated over time, they reveal a pattern that chips away at intimacy. Consistency is often the first casualty. The person may be affectionate during calm periods, only to become distant when emotional depth enters the picture. They might respond normally during light conversations, but retreat or disconnect the moment feelings are involved. Their availability becomes unpredictable, especially when emotional needs are expressed. Verbal minimalism is another early warning sign. When questions about the relationship arise, the answers become vague. It's fine. I don't know. Let's not overthink it. These aren't just dismissals. They're attempts to keep emotions at a distance. Avoidants often use brevity to keep control. The less said, the less vulnerability exposed. Discomfort with closeness can also appear in physical ways. Physical intimacy may still exist, but emotional intimacy during those moments feels absent. Eye contact is limited. Conversations before or after sex stay on the surface. There's no sense of shared emotional experience, just presence without connection. Many partners misread these signs. They assume it's just stress, or that the other person needs time. So they step back, try to be patient, and hope that space will help. But emotional distance rarely improves on its own. It usually deepens, becoming more entrenched, as avoidance is rewarded with silence or lowered expectations. Increased independence becomes a shield. The avoidant partner may emphasize the importance of personal freedom, separate routines, or the belief that relationships should be easy and drama-free. These ideas seem healthy, but they're often used to avoid uncomfortable emotional work. Conversations that require self-reflection or admission of emotional impact are bypassed under the banner of simplicity. Another sign is the way conflict is handled or avoided. Avoidants often refuse to engage in arguments, not because they're calm, but because confrontation feels unsafe. Instead of working through issues, they disconnect, they leave messages on read, they disappear for days. They insist nothing's wrong, even when emotional tension is clear. This non-response becomes a form of control. The partner is left to carry the emotional burden alone. There's also a pattern of rewriting emotional history. After moments of distance or withdrawal, the avoidant might return without addressing what happened. They may act as if everything is normal. When asked about the previous tension, they downplay it or deny its impact. This leads to a cycle where real issues are left unresolved, and the partner is forced to choose between pressing the subject or pretending to move on. Over time, these red flags accumulate. What was once brushed off as personality differences starts to feel like emotional abandonment. The partner begins to second-guess their instincts. They wonder if they're asking for too much or being overly sensitive. But the truth is that emotional availability is not a luxury. It's a basic requirement for connection. Recognizing these patterns early can prevent deeper emotional damage. Naming them doesn't mean blaming, but it does mean refusing to normalize behavior that leaves one partner emotionally stranded. Withdrawal is not neutrality, it's absence. And absence, over time, creates resentment that no relationship can survive unaddressed. Trying to change an avoidant partner often feels like a personal mission. You care about them, you see their potential, and you believe that if you're understanding enough, patient enough, and strong enough, you can help them open up. You think maybe all they need is the right kind of love, yours. This belief is common, but it's also the beginning of emotional exhaustion. Avoidant individuals rarely view their behavior as something that needs fixing. They've adapted to see emotional independence as strength and emotional expression as risky or unnecessary. When they pull away, they often see it as self-regulation. When they go silent, they think they're avoiding conflict. But for their partner, these actions feel like rejection, disconnection, and abandonment. The more someone tries to close the gap, the more the avoidant partner may resist. They don't want to be rescued, guided, or emotionally pushed. Even gentle conversations can be seen as pressure. What you see as a moment of closeness, they experience as discomfort or even intrusion. The relationship becomes a cycle where one person is always reaching while the other is always retreating. What gets lost in this dynamic is the emotional well-being of the person trying to make it work. They spend so much time adjusting, saying less, asking for less, walking on eggshells, that they begin to erase their own needs. They don't notice the slow erosion of their self-respect until they feel hollow, anxious, and unseen. Emotional growth can't be forced. It has to come from within. An avoidant person has to decide that the way they relate to others isn't working for them. They need to want to understand why they withdraw, why they fear closeness, and why they protect themselves even in moments of love. Without this awareness, no partner, no matter how loving, can create lasting change. Love can be supportive. Love can be safe. But love cannot carry both people. If the avoidant person won't meet you halfway, the relationship becomes survival, not connection. Not every relationship with an avoidant partner is doomed. But for it to work, certain conditions must exist. Change is possible, not through persuasion or pressure, but through self-awareness and personal responsibility. Without that, no amount of love will be enough. The first condition is recognition. An avoidant person must be willing to acknowledge that their emotional distancing isn't neutral, it's harmful. They need to accept that what feels like safety to them can feel like rejection to someone else. This recognition doesn't always come naturally. Often, it only emerges when consequences become clear. Relationships end, trust erodes, or partners walk away. Openness to discomfort is also essential. Avoidants must learn to tolerate emotional risk. Connection requires showing parts of themselves they've kept hidden for years. That includes fear, insecurity, and past experiences they've minimized or dismissed. Without confronting these areas, emotional growth remains blocked. Therapy can be useful here. It provides a structured space to explore emotional patterns without the pressure of a romantic dynamic. In therapy, avoidants can begin to trace where their avoidance started and why it became their default. They can also begin practicing what they often resist, naming emotions and staying present with them. Equally important is mutual effort. A relationship cannot survive if only one person is doing the work. The avoidant partner must make intentional choices to stay engaged, respond to emotional needs, and resist the urge to run when things get close. That doesn't mean becoming instantly expressive. It means showing up even when it's uncomfortable. On the other side, the partner of an avoidant must set clear boundaries. Hope alone is not a strategy. If the avoidant person refuses to grow or reflect, staying in the relationship becomes an act of self-sacrifice. Emotional availability is not a bonus. It's a requirement. Some avoidant relationships can evolve into something secure and meaningful, but it requires both people to commit to emotional honesty, not just affection. Survival mode has to be replaced with real connection, not through rescue, but through mutual responsibility. Emotional damage caused by avoidance doesn't disappear on its own. Both people involved often carry the weight, one from years of holding back, the other from repeated emotional rejection. Healing requires action, not waiting. For partners of avoidance, the first step is to reconnect with your own emotional baseline. You may have spent so much time adapting to their distance that you lost sight of what healthy connection feels like. Start by asking what you need, what you've silenced, and what kind of relationship you actually want. Healing doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means letting go of someone who cannot meet you emotionally, even if they care. For avoidance, healing begins with honesty, not with others, but with yourself. Avoidance may have protected you in the past, but it now prevents you from experiencing the full depth of human connection. Growth means learning to sit with discomfort, to recognize emotional shutdown as a pattern, and to take small risks toward intimacy, even when it feels unfamiliar. Neither path is easy, but continuing the same dynamic without reflection guarantees repetition. Emotional pain doesn't just come from chaos or abuse, it also comes from absence, disconnection, and the quiet erosion of trust over time. Moving forward means choosing something different. Whether you stay, leave, reconnect, or rebuild, the choice must be rooted in truth, not in fear, guilt, or obligation. Avoidant behavior creates damage that's often underestimated. The emotional absence, the silence, the resistance to connection, it all adds up. These patterns don't just hurt relationships, they shape how people see themselves. Partners begin to believe they're too needy. Avoidants convince themselves they're safer alone. Both suffer in silence. Facing the truth is uncomfortable. It forces both people to admit what isn't working. But avoiding that truth leads to more pain, repeated conversations that go nowhere, moments of closeness that collapse without warning, and hopes that dissolve into frustration. There's strength in confronting emotional distance head-on. For the partner, it means acknowledging that love alone won't fix someone. For the avoidant, it means recognizing that protecting yourself from pain has also kept you from real connection. Relationships should be built on clarity, not guessing. If you've lived in emotional confusion, you owe yourself more. If you've created emotional distance, you owe others honesty. This isn't about blame, it's about responsibility. Healing begins where avoidance ends. You don't need perfect connection, but you need truth and the willingness to act on it. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more. And if you'd like to support the channel, a super thanks would mean the world. Thank you for watching.